Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Race O'Clock podcast and to episode number 3. We have, of course, Formula One returning this weekend. What's that? It's already back? We had testing? We've seen the new cars? No, that doesn't matter. We have instead our first Grand Prix, the Australian Grand Prix. It's coming up. We're all very excited and maybe just a little bit apprehensive. We'll have to wait and see. Is there doom-mongering of these new regs? Absolutely. Is it justified? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. We'll discuss it all today and more with, of course, my glorious co-host. It is, of course, the world's big, friendliest Gandalf. It is Tom Knight, TK. Hello, TK. How are we doing?
Hello, Daniel. Why do I feel this is going to become a running bit every time you introduce me just as big, friendly Gandalf? I'm not contesting the idea by any means, but hey, it's something new for the listeners if they're not watching the show as well. But the more important factor, Formula One is back, baby. I am so excited.
It's so good to be back here in race season now. I think it's one of those things which I think that we've all been looking forward to it. Even if you're not necessarily a fan of the new rules, it's just that Formula One is back. That's, that regular programming of most Sundays. You're going to sit down and you're going to enjoy Formula One. I say most Sundays. It's not quite most Sundays, but it's very, very close. I mean, most Sundays would be 26 races. We're doing 24. That's already a pretty close number.
As long as we get all 24 races and we're not seeing any postponements or delays for any obnoxious reason that we're not going to mention here today, because I made a promise that we're not going to.
No particular reason. None at all.
No particular reason. Definitely
Don't look down on us, unkindly algorithm gods. Please, quickly, TK, say search engine optimization things. AI.
I can't wait to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch the Australian Grand Prix.
Yeah, there we go.
But yeah, I think it's fantastic to have it back, albeit I'm in two minds. I love Australia being the first race on the calendar. I don't like having it at 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, or whatever silly time it is, because every year I turn around and go, I'll just stay up, it's not that bad. And we get to about lap 4 when we're into that preservation era, and I go, I could very easily fall asleep right now.
Yeah, it's not the most fun thing in the world, is it? The staying up. I mean, we say this from the rather privileged position of being Europeans.
Yes.
Whereas, of course, our friends in America or people in the part of the world like Australia do have to get up a bit more regularly for unfriendly times. I tell you what, the races that I actually really, really like the most in terms of timing is actually all the races in the Western Hemisphere. All of, Mexico, Brazil, Austin, Miami, Vegas, all these, maybe not Vegas because that's in the middle of the night, but
Yeah.
for the rest of them, they're great because you get to basically tune in and have it as your evening's entertainment for Formula One. I love that. That's great. But of course, as I say, for American listeners, viewers, whatever platform you are watching or listening on, you, of course, you have to be staying up on the regular. So sorry about that. But maybe, get good at organising motorsports with some longevity back in the 1950s. Who knows?
If only you had a time machine and several $100 million worth of investment to procure yourself through 70 plus years of motorsport heritage and arrive at modern day with suitably timed races. It could never be.
Could never be. Not in this lifetime. But there is IndyCar, which did come back last week. We're not an IndyCar podcast as such, but did you follow that at all, TK? Did it come on your radar in any way?
I've seen it through stories of friends that are more into it. So I've got a couple of American friends, and obviously a good friend of both of ours, Hayden Gullis, is quite into IndyCar. So I frequently see it on people's Instagram stories or TikTok reels. I can't say I tune in apart from maybe the Indy 500.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's the attitude of a lot of European fans of motorsport. Certainly over here, I tend to find in my kind of exposure to racing fans, at least on a more regular basis, is that you have those who watch Formula One kind of first and foremost, or the World Endurance Championship, or MotoGP. That's one that often doesn't come up in these conversations, even though it is incredibly popular.
Yeah.
Particularly you go to a country like Spain or Italy, it's just as popular, if not more so, certainly in Spain's case, than Formula One. But yeah, IndyCar never really comes into the conversation in the same way. There are some people, of course, who do, as you say, really enjoy it, and it has that similar sort of appeal in a way as Formula One in the sense, or the timing sense at least, and that it does appear in the evenings here in the UK. But yeah, it never quite has the same breakthrough for whatever reason.
I think part of it has to do with the fact that it is so centralized to the US. Obviously, you have the likes of Euro NASCAR that comes to European circuits. I see them race at, Brands Hatch, for example. So you get that little dose of interest in NASCAR on circuits they're not designed for. And if you want to go watch a race, they're generally pretty cheap to go watch races. I got the privilege to do so a couple of years ago now when NASCAR came to brands, but you never have that translation necessarily between IndyCar and a European audience. You never see them come and race at, say, Silverstone. I'd love them to on maybe a special event, but because of how centralized their calendar is to the US, I think that's where its extremities really lack any far-reaching, essentially.
Yeah, and again, I'm conscious that most of the people tuning into this are not going to be IndyCar fans as such, but I do think it's quite interesting that IndyCar, it is that American-centric thing. Does have maybe 2 races in Canada, I believe, as well. But ultimately, it is a series that has quite a lot of international representation, at least in terms of the drivers. There's a lot of non-American drivers in IndyCar, and the most popular driver in IndyCar is Pato O'Ward. Pato O'Ward, of course, is the most popular driver in IndyCar in terms of things like social media following and other things. And it's still in the Northern American continent, is Mexico, where he's from. And so the idea that that there is not a race, or they're struggling, well, not struggling, that's the wrong way of thinking about it, actually, isn't it? Because IndyCar it's not that they struggle to try and get a race in there, it's just they refuse to engage with the idea of there being a race there.
Very much so. And I think if you also look at it from the standpoint of a Formula One fan, there is such a rhetoric at the moment that IndyCar is where drivers go after they're past their prime or haven't necessarily found the footing into a Formula One seat. You see a load of F2 drivers, you see the likes of Ericsson, who obviously lost his seat a few years ago, making the jump over to IndyCar. And there's such this rhetoric that goes around the paddock that it's just the B-tiered open wheel series. And realistically, it is some fantastic racing, but it lacks that, extra, intercontinental representation is probably the best way to put it.
I guess, yeah. I think there's definitely an element of sort of classism in Formula One, or European racing more generally, I think. If you were to compare, any form of European series, they would always say, it's a higher tier than the equivalent Formula 4 series in Asia or Japan or Australia or whatever. Because, another one that we've not even discussed here is something like Super Formula, which is full of great drivers and great cars and everything else. So there's a huge amount of potential within these series. It just needs to be opened up. The other thing that I find mad as well, again, we're extending the IndyCar topic here, and I don't know why, but IndyCar have now got, of course, by decree of the president, a race in Washington, D.C. And that surprised me to be, as far as I could make out, the only East Coast race on their calendar.
Yeah, I think they've had some in years gone by, but again, it's very almost localized within the US, isn't it? You have a lot round the maths here. West Coast, East Coast, whatever. One of the coasts.
West Coast,
West Coast. It's that side of the US. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But as you said, they don't reach the far extremities of where they possibly could go, and there is a lack of. It's not like there's a lack of racetracks, is it? It's not that as a foundation.
Not at all. And even then, Formula One has proven with Vegas and Miami that you can make street circuits that are perfectly entertaining, and or at least the sort of entertainment that certain fans, shall we say, are drawn towards. And I'm sure that there is a crossover of that type of fan within both Formula One and IndyCar. So, something like a New York IndyCar Grand Prix, I don't see why that couldn't work. You just, there's going to be all the complaints, you'd have to shut the city down, etc., etc. But you got to do that for any major international event anyway, and it's something that's only going to be there for 2-3 days, something in that region. So I think that IndyCar's got an awful lot to grow there. I think it's I would never suggest that Liberty take over or anything like that, because I think that monopolization of sport is a bad thing. The idea of them owning MotoGP as well as Formula One is something that rubs me a little bit the wrong way, but it's they could take some lessons, certainly, from how Liberty Media have grown Formula One. I'm going to throw it to you for a last thought, and then I need you to rescue me from the IndyCar chat, because we're nearly 15 minutes in to our F1 podcast, and we've barely mentioned the fact that the first race of the season is coming.
I'll tell you what, I'll do you one better. We'll go from IndyCar on even more of a tangent out the way from Formula One. You mentioned a New York race. I'll tell you what I want to see is Central Park hosting a rallycross event, because I think that would be spectacular.
That would be amazing, and especially if they got the women with the pigeons in Home Alone to be like the start-finish flag lady. She'd wave it better than... I shouldn't say that. I'm going to bleep that out.
No.
But there we go. So, Formula One. TK, guess what?
What?
It's race week.
Yes!
Yes. So, Formula One is coming back to our screens this weekend, testing not included. So it's Albert Park, it's Australia. We know that this is a circuit which in normal times gone by, in which we did not have energy-starved cars, this was already something that was maybe just a little bit more marginal in terms of fuel, particularly in the last few years when they've removed some of the braking events and now areas that were corners are just flat out sections of straight, in particular that sort of middle of the lap before you head to the high-speed left-right chicane. What is your initial gut reaction to going back to Australia, not just for the sort of the spectacle and all the wonderful things about Australia, but specifically this year and with these cars and these rules?
I think it'll be really interesting because I think we've seen so much online and so much speculation in the shakedown that wasn't the testing, but then the testing that wasn't the practice, before we even get to free practice one that wasn't testing or a shakedown, about how limited these cars were in straight line with that battery element that they have in them, that they can push for short periods of time. But obviously you mentioned that long back straight essentially that's in towards turn 9 and turn 10, and I think we're going to see what used to be a fantastic overtaking opportunity, obviously the rear wing being able to open and have the cars go flying past one another as they run down the drive. It's just not going to happen. They'll run out of battery by the time they get to turn 9, or they'll be saving for that next little sprint up towards turn 11. So I don't think we're going to see the spectacles that we've seen in years gone past, because we haven't got to a stage yet where teams and or drivers have figured out where to save battery, where they have to save battery. And I think we're going to see some mismanagement this weekend.
I think the mismanagement point is absolutely right. I think that the notion that teams are going to have these cars all figured out and ready to go by Australia, it's just not possible. I mean, Formula One is full of very, very clever people, right? Even the least intelligent person in Formula One is going to be more intelligent than the average person, I think, at least. But when you take the history to show us, first year of the ground effects rules that we've just come out of, there was porpoising that teams didn't anticipate, and then they had to adjust around. In the previous years, when you go to the wide-body cars of 2017, teams suddenly that had looked reasonably strong in 2016 looked terrible because they couldn't manage the airflow properly off of the much wider tyres. You go even further back, 2014, new engines come in, everything goes pop, bang, whiz, everything else. You've then got, you go even further back, there's things like the double diffuser versus blown diffuser and how that all works, and then people setting their cars on fire because they didn't end up getting the exhaust blown diffuser done properly. And you go back and back and back and back and back. And any time that there's a new innovation that all teams adopt, or there's a new set of rules, there is always in that first year, it might be resolved by the end of the first year, but always in the first year there is something which then will cause teams a headache and cause problems and other various things. If we go even further back, then of course 1994, reintroduction of refueling, and people catch fire, people don't fuel up properly, etc., etc. Jos Verstappen in the pits in Germany, for example, that great big fireball. So I think that you've hit the nail on the head as far as mismanagement of the cars is concerned. I think that people are going to absolutely fundamentally get it wrong, and then will be very easily passed as a result. Whether that is then maintained, we'll have to wait and see. When it comes to these new cars, I think aesthetically, I think it's fair to say, if we've not already said this on a previous couple of episodes, I think it's right and proper to say these are good-looking Formula One cars.
They are, and I think we've found almost that balance between the first ground effect cars, obviously when we headed into this season, and then the 22 and onwards cars, where they looked a little bit more rounded, a little bit kind of over-engineered is a very way that I looked at it. The rounded rear wings, everything had to make sure that it was directing airflow really nice and neatly. But actually, I really like the 2009, 2012, that era of Formula One, because in my eyes, those are the cars that looked absolutely fantastic. And I think we found this lovely middle ground between this is how we want the cars to be designed so they work well, versus this is how we want the designs to look nice on track. And the teams have also then doubled down on liveries, because of course they've added the mandatory paint rules effectively, and made them look absolutely bloody stunning.
They are. They're lovely looking things this year. There's maybe one or two exceptions, and if Scotty was with us today, I'm sure that this would open him up perfectly for a good old rant about the liveries that we've got.
Cadillac especially.
Mercedes, he's not a fan of as well. Of course, he famously, if you've not seen Scotty's video about the Mercedes liveries, or, well, about all the liveries, but particularly the bit about Mercedes, he makes his feelings quite well known, I think it's fair to say.
Yes.
So, yeah. From that perspective, it's great. Aesthetically, the cars are brilliant. I think that what a lot of people were saying before the cars existed, I mean, all we had was that FIA render, the sort of the blue car with the yellow and red lines on it. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, they look like the 2005 cars. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that assessment now that the cars are out in the wild as such. Maybe in those initial renders, yeah, absolutely. I could see how that could work. But, yeah, now that we see them, they certainly seem to have more skinny rear wings than I was expecting based off of those renders. I mean, we know, of course, that there's less likelihood, shall we say, of things like circuit-specific packages being developed, like a Monza rear wing, because obviously if you're able to completely flatten the wings and gain a huge amount of straight-line speed, it's not really a massive benefit that's going to come. There would be some benefit, don't get me wrong, but less so. I mean, it's a little bit like if you go back to 2010 and there were the F-ducts on the cars, and McLaren went with two different setups. They had Hamilton on a low downforce package with a skinny wing and everything else. They put Button onto the F-duct car, and we never got a fair shake, really, a fair comparison of the two, because Hamilton was out on the first lap. But Button still nearly won the Italian Grand Prix with what I can only describe as a barn door rear wing on the back of the thing, because they were able to stall the rear wing with the F-duct.
I think it'd be really interesting to see how the teams manage, especially at tracks like Monza, maybe China as well, where you've got these incredibly long straights and where the majority of the circuit is taken flat out, and you want to have as minimal drag on the cars as you possibly can, because when you do go into those higher speed corners, the likes of Curva Arboreto and through the chicanes, you are going to want to completely load that rear wing to get the turn in at the high speed. But then you can do what Ferrari are doing and flip that rear wing, turn it back to its straight line speed competitor, and I think we will see that straight line really opening up again, which could lead for some incredible lap times. I think those tracks will benefit the most.
Possibly. I suppose the counterpoint to something like that is that those circuits are where they're going to be very energy starved if there's not a huge amount of braking going on. Because you will have super clipping, which is all explained. There was a feature we were going to do this week, and TK's right to laugh because it is quite funny. Made the feature, it was all looking reasonably good, you know, for a new group that's getting its start in the world of podcasting and doing these things. It looked good and sounded good, and then Chain Bear suddenly decided to come out of retirement for the first time in years and upload a video. And don't get me wrong, this is an attack on him. He's amazing. I'm sure he's a lovely man. But why did he have to release essentially the exact same feature we were going to do, but much better than ours? It's not fair. Anyway, my point is, go and watch his video. Chain Bear on YouTube. Go and watch his video. Give him a lot of love. Tell him that we sent you, if you like. Bit of cross promotion is never bad. But yeah, he's brilliant at what he does in explaining Formula One and all the details of it. And he goes into all the detail there about these engines and about the energy starving, the super clipping, which is effectively the engine is going to be burning gasoline in order to charge the batteries on the straights. So you'll see a drop in speed where the batteries are charging and the MGUK is not necessarily deploying all that much, or it's technically deploying in reverse is what I think is correct term. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes on those more power-starved circuits. And of course, we'll get that first impression not just in Melbourne, but then, as you mentioned, you know, China has got that great big long back straight. I get the feeling that around China this year, with the lower downforce in the corners, we might see a little bit more in the way of braking and lifting to make sure that you keep the car within track limits and on the racing line. But broadly speaking, we're still at decent downforce levels. You know, we've got to describe the downforce of these cars in cornering mode as something around maybe sort of 2017 levels of speed, I suspect, something like that. Not quite, you know, when we get to the monsters of 2020, which are objectively the quickest cars of all time, but you know, something like 2017, certainly much quicker than 2016 and that generation of the narrow cars with the skinny rear wings, stuff like that. So it's all going to be very interesting, all going to be entertaining. Now, we have been teasing over the course of the last couple of weeks a full interview with Benjamin Daly. We've given you part one, we've given you part two, and now here comes part 3. Last little bit of discussion with Ben where he talks about, after the first 2 parts where he talks about himself and his upbringing and how he came to be where he is, the second part where we talked about his content, and now this third and final part is about what he's going to think of Formula One this year. Check it out. Now, of course, this is the Race O'Clock podcast. This is all to do with Formula One usually, and we've spent an awful lot of time talking, I would say, kind of Formula One adjacent, you and I here, Ben, talking about yourself. But now we take a look at Formula One as it exists today. Of course, we've got the new season coming, to give listeners and viewers the context. We're recording this the day after McLaren and Aston revealed their liveries, so we're still before the preseason test. This episode should be coming out after the first preseason test is done in Bahrain, and we're just about to start the second. So, Ben, first of all, new cars this year. They're looking a bit better proportioned, I think it's fair to say.
They are. They look really aggressive. They look lighter. They look faster. They certainly are faster in a straight line. But they just look good this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing them go racing. Hopefully they are able to follow a little bit closer. We are able to see more dynamic battling and racing and things like that. So a lot of unknowns heading into this year. A lot of reliance on the power unit, more specifically the battery, and who's going to utilize that the best. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that I think we're all eager to see when we turn up to the first race in Australia.
Absolutely. And of course, that first race on home soil, as far as you're concerned, I'm assuming you won't be going to that one, though. You're still going to be here, right?
I think I'm still going to be here unless someone magically invites me out in the next week or two, which you never know in this game. It tends to be last minute, but I'll be watching from the comfort of my couch, I think.
How is that couch? Is it particularly pleasant? Is it sort of leather or cloth, or what's the deal there?
No, it's like some kind of grey fabric. It's quite comfortable. I've fallen asleep there many a time over the years. So yeah, if I'm not too careful, I may fall asleep during the race. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
There you go. That's Benjamin Daly's approval of the new rules. But there we go. So in terms of these new cars, then you've hit on a lot of the sort of the key technical points. I'm sure that again, we're recording this before we do the actual podcast episodes. I'm sure that myself, Scotty, and TK are going to be talking about the technical aspects of these cars and everything else. Is there anything in particular? I'm going to kind of ask you here, sort of a part A and a part B. Is there anything about these cars that you particularly like in terms of changes versus the previous generation, and then anything that you don't?
I like that they are shorter. I like that they are lighter, a bit more nimble, a bit harder to control. I like that there's less downforce. So like that should affect dirty air a little bit less. They might be able to follow a little bit closer. I do worry about how fast these cars are in a straight line, whether the effectiveness of the new movable aero is going to have that much of an effect, because I feel like the faster you are in a straight line, the less drag you have, the less that's kind of going to have an impact. I just wonder if the cars are going to be too fast around certain tracks, especially once teams are able to find and add more layers of downforce as we go through this regulation era. Maybe too much reliance on the battery, potentially. It's really hard to say before we do go racing. I'm more of a like glass half full kind of guy, so I don't want to be shooting them down too much before we go racing. So I'm hoping just in a lot of areas it's going to be a lot better for the viewers and for the drivers as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And are there any? We look back in the last few years. Of course, you've made it no secret over your public life, shall we say, that you are a McLaren fan. So the last couple of years has been cause to celebrate, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's been a good couple of years. It's been a long time coming since McLaren had that bit of a downturn after Lewis left 2013, 2014 onwards. McLaren had to rebuild. They went through the Honda era, which the less said about that, the better. Zach Brown came in and really built the team slowly through there. Like not only like making the car faster, but if you just look at the McLaren and the amount of partners they have, they are doing very well from a business side of things to really bring back that brand. But talking about on track, yeah, it's been great the last few years. It's been a real pinch me kind of era as a McLaren fan. It's great to see them not only winning races, winning championships. The drivers haven't fallen out despite having a championship fight. The drivers seem to get on really well. They seem to be closely matched. So it's uh, when it comes to like one team dominating, I'm glad it was McLaren because they allow their drivers to race. And moving forward into the new era, it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of changes. They do have the Mercedes power unit, and we know the Mercedes sound like they're pretty confident in their camp. So we should expect McLaren to be at least in the front few fights. Fighting the likes of Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, maybe. Um, but we won't truly know until we hit the track on that Saturday in Albert Park.
We won't indeed. And you mentioned there, it's a bit of an interesting topic, really. This whole idea around McLaren trying to keep things amicable between their drivers. We didn't see a big blow up, like in the case of say Senna and Prost, if we keep it to McLaren, or Hamilton Rosberg, if we look at more recent times that maybe some of our listeners will be a bit more familiar with. What do you think is potentially, I mean, certainly from my perspective, I feel that when you end up having teams where that is not the case, where you don't have two evenly matched drivers who potentially are at more risk of coming together and having friction between them. But you look at things like a Verstappen versus Perez, Schumacher versus Barrichello, even people like Jim Clark in Lotus all the way back in the 1960s. These are times where drivers have dominated their teammates, whether that be down to skill, politics, circumstance, whatever it happens to be of the day. I think that's one of the most damaging things that can happen in the sport. But is that something that you would necessarily share as an opinion, or do you think there's something that's worse for Formula One than a driver dominating?
Um, I don't think so. Well, so hang on. Can you say that again? I kind of lost
Yeah.
my train of thought.
So don't worry. So one driver dominating, that I think is a big risk to Formula One. Is that, do you feel, something that you would share as an opinion, or do you have something else that you think this is a bigger threat to Formula One from a kind of business and engagement perspective and things like that?
Oh, there are certainly worse things than a driver dominating in F1. There maybe having a rule set that might be terrible for racing or a lack of road relevancy. I go back to V8 Supercars again, which is a series that's really struggling at the moment because they are trying to hold on to this dinosaur age of keeping V8s going, um, uh, naturally aspirated, and there's just not many like technical partners, manufacturers are wanting to jump into that series to fund it or invest the time and resources to go racing there. So that series is dying a little bit. F1 is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. F1 is very forward thinking and they're looking at the future technologies and what's going to be road relevant that eventually trickle down into road cars that we have today. So F1 by comparison, I think is thriving and it's doing really well at the moment. A driver dominating for a year it's not great to see, but it tends to be a temporary kind of problem. You see the Schumachers, the Verstappens, they dominate for a time, but then another team comes along or another driver comes along, and we're kind of satisfied for a time, but then we get bored of that. But that someone dominating is not going to kill a sport. Um, Brand partner stepping away, like lack of money, lack of fans, whatever. That's then going to be worse. But in the context, yeah, I think you would always prefer for two drivers to be closer. So yeah, I mean, as a motorsport fan, as a motorsport, like there's always threats to the sport itself, but I'd like to think that the brand is so strong that it should be able to stand the test of time. I would hope.
And just in terms of, obviously, you mentioned there things like you mentioned that road relevancy, you mentioned that forward-thinking nature of Formula One. There have been, of course, some people within certain quarters. The president of the FIA, for example, has talked openly about the idea of a return to those kind of more dinosaur, old school, naturally aspirated engines, V8s, V10s, whatever it happens to be. But of course, with the caveat it being this modern technology of the synthetic fuels, the 100% sustainable fuels, all this sort of a thing. Do you see that as being something viable, or does Formula One still need to keep leaning into things like electrification and future technology? Or does it become just a bit more almost like horse racing, really, where the function of the horse in society used to be that it was mode of transport, it was all these other things, but now it's kind of resigned to entertainment and leisure.
I think if they go towards electrification, then you're kind of blurring the lines between F1 and Formula E. Formula E has set itself apart as the electric racing series, so I think F1 would want to stay away from that. Keeping my ear to the ground on the automotive industry side of things, I think we're starting to see that maybe electrification maybe isn't. It's certainly an option, but it may not be the viable option, at least for the short, medium term future. And until they can make battery efficiency, like you can have batteries that can go for 1,000 miles or something like that. It's still a little bit impractical and it's not for everyone. So a little bit less road relevancy there. What we are seeing though, and you did touch upon that, is the sustainable fuels. Um, the synthetic fuels at the moment it's very expensive and it is a long old process of actually making that viable, so it's quite pricey, it's quite expensive, but I think as teams invest in this, as manufacturers invest in this, it becomes cheaper to do it. And I would hope that they'll be able to make this work and make it viable for not only racing but just for everyone, so that then like these manufacturers can then go, oh, maybe we can bring back V8s, maybe we can bring back V10s if sustainable fuel is a lot more accessible and a lot more just usable. So um it's certainly something that everyone is thinking about, and that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Like, do we go this one route or do we go the other? One is a lot more appealing than the other, and I hope they're able to make it work. So I think F1 is going in that kind of direction. Like they're not going fully synthetic, but they're introducing a little bit more each year, I believe.
Yeah, well, it's going to be that fully synthetic fuels or 100% sustainable fuels this year, isn't it? And then of course,
Yes.
whether we end up then seeing different technologies and additives and other things in the future, we'll have to wait and see. We've not got long left, really. I'm afraid, as time has flown by on
It
this
has, yeah.
definitely first recording. But in our last couple of minutes, then let's take it from today and let's throw it back. Obviously, you talk about kind of 2009, 2010, Mark Webber's kind of arrival, if you like. He'd obviously been in the sport for many years before, but that first time, as you say, he gets thrust into championship contention is kind of where you came on board. Is there anything from further back in Formula One's history that you've sort of since looked back on, you sort of think, that's impressive, or that's cool, or that's not even necessarily even in a positive way, but anything that just jumps out at you from history?
2004, Michael Schumacher, with just that dominant Ferrari era. It was pretty hard to be a human and not hear about Ferrari and F1 of that time, and how the magnificence of what they were achieving at the time, creating a dynasty. Of course, the mind gravitates towards Ayrton Senna as well, in the McLaren, that rivalry with Prost, 1998, 1999, 1989 and 90. Oh my goodness, that was just what a time to be an F1 fan. What a time to be alive. Unfortunately, I was not alive then, but going back and seeing that those historic years of F1, wow, what a time to be an F1 fan. Yeah, so I would say that I think maybe the '60s era of Jim Clark also stands out a little bit as well, but that's really stretching it. But I think the more modern history, if you can call it that, is certainly the Senna era and Schumacher for me.
Excellent. There we go. Nice and succinctly put. But there we are then. We are now at uh, a 1 hour recording after our first botched attempt. And I think we've been going about 45-ish minutes in our interview. Of course, everybody listening, this will be part 3, most likely. Maybe it's even a part 4. Who knows? I'll have to see in the edit. But whatever part this is the end of the Benjamin Daly interview now on Race O'Clock. So just a massive, massive thank you to you, Ben. And where, of course, can people find you? Is there anything you want to promote, to talk about before we wrap up here?
You can find me on Instagram, Benjamin_Daily. That's the only non-TM at Marduk platform. If you search TM at Marduk anywhere else, you should be able to find me. I stream, I do YouTube videos. Yeah, I post short content occasionally, and I'd like to get myself to the odd race or two this year. So watch this space.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin Daly.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and all that good stuff. And yeah, watch this space. Should be cool.
We've trained him well. So there we are then. That was our last part with Benjamin Daly. Now, next week, we are hoping to get a recording done with our next guest between now, when this episode comes out, and that first week coming up afterwards. I've butchered that, but we're going to keep it in. Whatever. Let's keep going. So next week, new interview should be done, and we should therefore have part 1 of that coming up. But just in case the times don't line up, we've got discussions with their managers and various other things, just in case it doesn't pull off, let's just wait and see, and then maybe we'll have a new interview for you next week. If not, then it'll just be a nice big jumbo show of lots of chit-chat between myself, TK, and Scotty. We'll wait and see. TK, you brought up a bit of news before we got recording here, which has made me a little bit sad, but it's not necessarily completely shutting the door on the idea. Go ahead and tell everybody what it is that has been discussed in the press.
So, Tifosi fans, cover your ears right about now, because I've got some bad news coming the way of Ferrari. Their infamous rear wing that has been teased and talked about over the last couple of weeks, the one that it quite literally does the Macarena, if you watched last week's episode, it is not going to be on the car for Australia. It has been confirmed by Italian news sources. They are not planning on bringing it to the opening round. I'm guessing they haven't had enough time to test and develop it, but they are confident that they are going to be bringing the wing at some point. Rumours suggesting at the moment potentially, well, definitely Canada, if not Bahrain as a slightly earlier picture as when we'll see that. But again, it'll be interesting to see not only the difference between the opening car in the first few rounds and then when it gets put on the car, but also what they do in the meantime. Are we going to go back to that traditional DRS flap that a lot of the teams have been running, but they notably haven't been testing at testing that wasn't testing, but it was a shakedown, but not testing?
Yes. Confused yet?
No.
We certainly aren't. We've been saying this for weeks now. But yeah, I'm on the one hand, I'm quite sad that Ferrari aren't using this piece of technology, because I think it looked fantastic and the ideas behind it were brilliant as well. But clearly, if they're not running it, either they want it to mature a bit and they want to work on it, reintroduce it at a later point, or maybe it's just not quite delivering what they expected. In terms of the other teams, though, there's a bit of, for those of you who may have been listening back when this was an audio-only podcast and when it was just me doing this years ago, you might be familiar with the Alpine Corner. And that was when it was 2024. Alpine were in a bad way, okay? Let's be honest. Not that they improved very much. Yes, they weren't doing well. Their car was ugly and it had no paint on it. I didn't like Alpine very much in 2024. I'm going to be completely honest. It was just my own personal bias against Alpine for whatever reason. They were actually
I was
bad
more
in
employed that
2025.
they haven't got any better.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, that's fair. That's also true. But, well, as far as results last season are concerned, at least, they might be doing reasonably well this year. We'll talk more about them in a little bit. But I think the Alpine Corner is going to have to be renamed to Aston Martin Corner this season, because it's not looking good. Reports indicating some rumours, and, you know, we always take rumours with a pinch of salt here on this show. We don't necessarily jump wholeheartedly into it. There were some people who were speculating online, for instance, that Mercedes were always going to end up turning up with fuel that didn't work, or that they hadn't had it signed off by the FIA. It's just been signed off. It's something that they always knew was going to be in the plan, was always going to be working. You've got to take these things with a pinch of salt. If they were actually panicking about it, you would have gotten a sense of that in legitimate media coverage. Put it that way. Don't rely on podcasts and TikToks to give you information. Oh no. Anyway, so we've got news then that this is a rumour that Aston Martin will not be able to complete a race distance owing to their problems with the Honda engine and the lack of spare parts in particular. They wanted to preserve it as long as they can. Now, we discussed a little bit last time about some of these issues that they're having. More has come out since then. There's the ongoing discussion. This is about vibrations that were not seen in the testing prior to testing, and by that we mean on the test bench. Now, when Honda are running the engine on a dyno, of course, the rest of the car isn't around it. So if it's something to do with Aston Martin, then you'd imagine that Honda would have picked it up before then. But then, of course, they do have a full chassis dyno over at Sakura, and they tested it there, and it also wasn't a problem. It was only when they got the car in person on the track that they then started to experience these issues. Now, correlation being one of the most important things in Formula One is something I have stressed before in the old version of the podcast, and I think in this version as well. It's come up once or twice. And you need to make sure that all the data that you are harvesting from, whether that be as an engine supplier running it on the test bench, whether that be as a team working on wind tunnel stuff and CFD and all these sorts of things, it needs to correlate with the real world. If it doesn't, then you're essentially reading off of two different hymn sheets. It is impossible to be able to calibrate a race car if all of your tools are saying one thing, the real world says another. And it sounds, TK, like Honda are in that latter situation.
Yeah, it's a really bizarre situation. It's almost going back to that 2022 situation where all the teams turned up to testing and suddenly realized their cars were porpoising everywhere because all the simulations were showing that, oh, it should be fine in a straight line and we're not going to see any issues. And then you get halfway down the main straight and suddenly everybody's bopping like it's 1990. They're just doing this if you're not watching on the view. Just come and watch, because there's a great gift to be made of this probably. But I think, as you're rightly saying, it's that break in the chain between what happens in the real world and what happens in a lab, in a testing facility, in practice, where you can replicate as much as you possibly can, but you are never going to be able to replicate every real world scenario perfectly.
Yes, 100%. And, when you look at this situation, I'm reminded once again, and I hate to keep bringing it up because I don't want to keep bringing it up because it's painful memories and it's a painful description of the situation that is at hand at the moment. But it just reminds me of McLaren and Honda in 2015.
Yeah.
Similar sort of story, car comes to the track, Honda doesn't quite understand what's gone wrong, and they're going to work on a fix. If anything, really, it's more like 2017 when the new engine architecture came in and they had things like, basic stuff like oil tank did not work properly, was designed improperly, and therefore under the speeds and the loads of actually being in a car going around corners at high speed, it was not feeding oil to the engine properly. Thankfully, Honda don't have that, but you would argue that maybe random vibrations destroying the battery is almost worse than an oil tank that you could just redesign, put a new one in, and then it would feed the oil to your engine.
Absolutely. And I am questioning where this stands, because obviously they've been performers with Red Bull for so long. They know the sport inside and out. They are one of the, if not the heritage name in Formula One, right? They are a key part of the technology. They're a key part of the history. And to go from dominating championships with Red Bull, and I don't know how much you can blame on the new regulations, because surely they would have had test benches and practice and the ability to figure out stuff like this. But also, the minute you go, okay, something's not quite working here, where is that knowledge, that history base gone to turn around and go, it's probably this causing it? Or we can figure out a solution quickly, because they've had a lot of shakedowns, a lot of practice, or a lot of testing rather. The fact that it's barely come up once, or to a degree that it hasn't broken to the media once, and that's probably where I'm standing with this, is interesting to see, because I wonder how long they've had these issues before the press have got a hold of them.
So essentially what you're saying is you wonder whether they actually knew about these things ahead of time and just didn't say anything, and then it's come to light in the light of day. I'm not sure necessarily if that's the case. I think that usually when it comes to these things, I mean, teams, Aston Martin were expecting to obviously have that shaky start to the shakedown in Spain. That's why they arrived late. It's why they got, only a couple of laps in. But then all outward signs were that they were going to then make up for that lost mileage in the test. But then it all sort of fell apart for them. And I don't imagine, I mean, if Aston Martin didn't know, that's not necessarily that Honda didn't know. But then again, I think we briefly may have talked about this on the podcast. If we didn't, then it's probably one of these conversations we have off the podcast, because funnily enough, we're mates and we hang out and we talk about these things off the podcast as well. But there's a certain working culture in Japan that's very different to the West. And, it's one of the things that contributed to McLaren and Honda not working well, and what everyone points to in 2015 about size zero and all this sort of thing of McLaren delegating to Honda and telling Honda they had to do this and forcing them to do this. It's not the case at all. It's that clash of Western versus Japanese work culture, in that the McLaren collaborators, if you like, were then turning around saying, we want to do this, can you do this? And then that Japanese way of working is that if you can't do something, you can't admit to not being able to do it. You have to simply figure out how it's done and say yes in the meantime. And this is not a new modern phenomenon. This is something that goes back to even the 90s when McLaren and Honda were first together. When they first introduced their V12 engine for 1991, Gerhard Berger tested it, was asked by Honda whether or not it was good, and Berger sarcastically said, yes, you can race that, and then they go and race it and it turns out to be an absolute bucket of bolts. And so it's almost a more literal way of looking at things, I suppose you could say. But with that to one side, with Aston Martin's particular predicament, I mean, not being able to finish a race, that would be worse than how the McLaren-Honda partnership started in 2015, because at least Button, albeit on a detuned engine that was limping its way around, did manage to complete most of a race distance, albeit a few laps down on the leaders.
You're absolutely right. And I wonder whether we'll see an element of that if they can do some work behind the scenes or over the course of 3 days at this point until we get testing properly, get practice underway properly. Got so ingrained in my mind just to call it testing now. I've forgotten that practice exists. But I wonder if we are going to see a situation like that where they maybe tune down the car or fix a couple of things that will get it to the end of a race in spare of just retiring after the first stint in hopes that the engine doesn't blow up. Because you've got to find that balance of, and I don't want to speak too corporately about Formula One, but you've got to find that balance of keeping the sponsors happy and keeping the FIA and the fans and that side of the Formula One world happy, because the sponsor paid for their car to do a certain number of laps generally, or do a certain visual showing, and then you go against what do the fans want? Do they want to see him do a race, or do they want to see him retire after 10 minutes? And I don't think there's a right answer in there.
I think there's a lot of people who will be upset with me for saying this, but I think there is an answer, and it's you satisfy the former. Fans are obviously what make the sport, and without fans there's no interest from sponsors, and they pull out and then series go under. We saw that with things like Can-Am back in the 60s and 70s. Fan interest disappears, sponsor interest then goes with it, and the series spends itself to death, basically. And Formula One has never been in that position, fortunately, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it now. But when you have a team that is being funded by sponsorship and by a wealthy billionaire owner, they want to be there because of results. It's a sport at the end of the day. They want to be there and they want to win. And they want their products to be associated with good, not with embarrassing, not with bad, not with not being able to finish a race. And so what you will want to do is you'll want to maximize the sponsor and partner side of things. Now, whether that be trying to make it through a whole race, risking it and getting to the checkered flag and looking like a hero, great. There's a lot to go wrong there, though, if it doesn't work out. So that would upset sponsors. But equally, as you say, the embarrassment of not finishing a race, that also will upset sponsors. So I think it's a bit of a catch-22 they're in at the minute. Though, interestingly, going back to something you said before about how they got to this stage and with all their history and all their technical knowledge and their success with Red Bull and all this sort of thing, let me indulge you with a simile here, a little metaphor.
Ooh.
It would be a bit like, let's say, a country left the largest trading bloc in humanity and then wanted to have some sort of say as to what goes on within that trading bloc, but they've lost their vote because they have left. Honda essentially did the same thing with these engine regulations. They just said bye-bye in 2022 when the engines were all frozen and homologated. They completely dismantled their team and sent them off to other projects, or lost them to Red Bull powertrains, or lost them to Mercedes high-performance powertrains, or lost them to Ferrari powertrains. And then all of a sudden they go, new Formula One rules. Maybe we should get involved with those. That sounds like it's interesting to us. But by that point, lots of things already set in stone in terms of ideas. There was this very, very, very interesting article from motorsport.com Japan, I believe is where it came from, which was on the Formula One subreddit earlier this week. So go and check it out if you can find it. But in that, they were detailing things like Honda in the previous cycle of regulations. Everybody's been talking about how Mercedes has figured out this bigger compression ratio under hot temperatures and all these sorts of things, and that's therefore giving them a performance advantage. But it wasn't until this article came out that I'm not sure if I even knew this necessarily. I was going to say it wasn't until then I remembered. I actually don't know if I did know this, but Honda used much higher compression ratios than other engine manufacturers in the previous era. So reducing them down to 16:1 even before you get into all the discussion of, using clever tricks to enhance it and raise it and things like that in operation, that's already hurt them.
Yeah.
In addition to that, there was the banning of in-cylinder, not in-cylinder, but in-cylinder sensors, pressure sensors.
Yeah.
So then that way, essentially what Honda could do is to improve reliability and therefore performance, they could use these sensors to detect when the compression was at its absolute limit and then bang. And then cause the spark and cause the explosion within the engine to cause the pistons to go up and down. And these are now banned because the other engine manufacturers didn't use them, or certainly didn't use them to the same extent or expense as Honda did, and they didn't want anyone else to use them. And because Honda was gone, they didn't have a voice at the table, and so they're now gone. And now coming back into the sport, they go, oh, but can we have these back? No. Can't, because they're banned by the rules. So Honda have hurt themselves massively through their indecision to come back into Formula One, beyond what we already knew in the moving of people around and things being diluted, factory and assets being sold off and things like that. There's also now this technical side of things and the lack of representation at the table.
You're absolutely right. And I think I was going to bring another analogy to the table because I appreciate your metaphoric realization, but I think there's one that sums it up rather well. And imagine this, and it's probably a story that everyone's heard. Your friend gives up meat for the new year. They want to try and get a little bit healthier. They want to try and get a little bit leaner. So they're going to go vegetarian for a few months. And, they come around for the first race weekend and you're sat there cooking bacon on the grill. And they smell that bacon. They go, oh, that smells really nice. I really would love a bacon sandwich. But what they don't realise is you've bought enough bacon for exactly the amount of people that are already in the house. So therefore, to be able to give them a bacon sandwich, you'd have to go down to the shop, grab some more, buy some more, bring it home, and theirs will never be cooked to the same degree in the same amount of time. And there's no way to catch that up unless you rush through it, but then you risk burning the bacon, which is the greatest crime in all of humanity.
If we don't make that a short, then I'm not trying hard enough. That's fantastic. TK, that's the best analogy I've ever heard on this situation, and I will be stealing it. I will credit you, but I will be stealing it. Brilliant. Very, very good. We have got maybe just another few minutes now, because I'm conscious of the fact that for all of our listeners, TK needs to go. He's got things he needs to do. He's actually got a life to go and live, unlike me in this small red and black booth that I spend all my days in. Thank you. It's getting warm in here. Would you mind dropping some water off at some point? Just a straw through the hole. That would be fine. But we've got just a few minutes then to kind of wrap up some thoughts about the upcoming race. Now, Albert Park, we've already mentioned cars are going to be energy starved. I don't expect this is going to be the greatest showing of Formula One, but I would encourage that we try and keep an open mind and a positive mind about it. I have no doubt at all that if it does go badly, we will criticise it to ever-loving buggery next time out. But let's try and keep an open mind as Formula One as a whole, as a community, as all these things, because this is one of those outlier tracks. This is one of those ones where it will be worse than the norm, and Formula One should not be judged by these new rules in the first race of the season, in my opinion. Let's have a few races to pull our thoughts together, figure out what it looks like. Obviously, we may not get Bahrain, we may not get Saudi Arabia, we're not going to go into why that may not happen, but if we get those races, then it just paints a larger picture. But again, comes the caveat, you've got China with that great big long back straight, you've got areas of Suzuka that will be flat out, like the run from Spoon to the chicane through 130R, for example. And then, of course, there's Saudi, where despite the fact it's 27 corners, it will still be one of the most flat-out sections of race circuit that the cars visit all year long. So take it with a pinch of salt. I know that in the modern world, everybody likes to judge things immediately and in a few seconds before they move on to the next thing, but try and give Formula One a little bit of a chance, I think. These are going to be really nice when this is played back to me and it turns out that I end up just criticising it to an enormous degree. TK, any thoughts from you before we wrap up for the day?
I think barring everything we've said and barring any speculative talks and maybe any speculation people are carrying forward towards the new season, I think we have to remember this is the sport we enjoy, the sport we love, the reason we get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch 22 cars going round in a circle. And we have waited weeks to see these cars back on track. And I know come 4 o'clock, come 5 o'clock, I will be awake with a cup of tea in hand and getting ready to cheer on McLaren domination once again.
Wouldn't it be nice?
It would.
Well, There we go then. With all that being said and done, that is our show. Thank you very much to TK for joining me over the course of this episode. I have been Daniel Gilligan, and we will see you next time.